Ready to order? Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Yes. Hey, Teresa. Derek,
Hello, hello.
are you actually here? Okay.
I'm here. I'm just trying to eat my soup.
Oh, okay. Is there any chance that you could do me the honor of taking the minutes?
Okay.
God bless you, dear. I promise this is the last time I'm going to ask you to do that.
Yuck, yuck, yuck.
Enjoy my humor and smile. Okay.
Hello, everyone.
At 6 p.m., present,
Gladys.
we have committee members Kate Kennedy, Jesse Fernandez, Mrs. Bizet, Al Russo. Also attendant, I see Ann Mead, Don, Mike, and Mr. Walson. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Good evening, Mr.
I'd like
Russo.
to
Good evening,
make
everyone.
an opening statement, Mr. Walson.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Russo. So
Good
good evening, everyone. And this evening we are meeting for two purposes. One, our monthly finance report, and John will walk us through that. And then part two of the agenda speaks to our preliminary ask for 24-25. And so it's really a sharing of data and information to drive some discussion, help the committee and eventually board get a clearer understanding about the position we're in, given the expiring funds from ESSER 3. So John, if you can get us underway, I'm
Sure.
ready. You and Mr. Russo are.
Take it away,
Thanks.
John.
Yeah, Ken, could you put the report up on the share screen? Okay. And we were Mike Weaver and I were going to do a combination tonight. He's calling in. I think that's his number you see down there at the bottom. But he's having some connectivity issues, so I'll probably take more of the lead, and then if we have any questions, I'm sure Mike can answer. Let me just.
That's your new assistant, right?
Yes. I
Okay.
thought, yeah. I think y'all had a chance to meet him at the last meeting.
Yeah.
Good.
I'm going to go offline.
Here it is. Okay. All right. Thank you, Ken. So the monthly report this month is through October, and 95% of our budget is encumbered or expended, which is typical for this time of year. And I guess we'd say that nothing has really changed of significance since last month. It wasn't that long ago that we met. And there's no variations really from the last time to report on. We still have some things out there, though, that are worth mentioning. Our request before the ad hoc committee is still pending to make up the balance of this year's budget from reserves. My estimation is all the committees will be reconstituted at the beginning of December. So I imagine we'll be back on track in December with that committee. So that's still out there. And then we have our two requests that we passed last month for really unanticipated things that happened after the budget was in place. The first, as you recall, was the cyber breach that came July 18th, if I remember correctly. And that I wrote the summary letter today for the mayor's office for that one. I'm hoping to do the other one tomorrow. It's just a memo, and we'll share it with all of you, that just says, here's what we're asking for, here's why, here's the motion, and it goes to the mayor's office with a copy to Dan Garrick, the finance director. And as I said, the second letter I'm going to try and draft tomorrow. That's the one for special education and the mandate that changed late in June, requiring us to provide educational services to disabled youngsters up to their 22nd birthday. And that's a change from age 21 a year before. So those two things are still out there. I'd also like to mention the city audit that's going on. They're auditing year end or June 30th of 2022. Some of the email traffic back and forth the last day or so, the partner, Scott Bassett, is still hoping to finish by Thanksgiving. That's his goal. That was the target he laid out when we had our August kickoff meeting. He sounded like he can still do that. I think if you remember, I told you we have a portal, and they put requests out on the portal, and as we get information, we scan it back in. Initially there were about 85 requests for information, and we fulfilled those is the term they used. It got up into the low 90s. I think it was 6 more that they had added, and we fulfilled those as well. I think there are 4 new ones that have just come in the last day or so. I don't know if you can hear me, Mike, but if I recall, at least 2 of those are completed or will be completed. I know Mike Scanlon was sending one off at about an hour ago. So we're staying up with it. At this point, I describe it this way, that all of the major, if you could say that, records and reports were submitted that they asked for. And now they're testing those, they're sampling those, they're saying, you know, you gave us this, now we'd like to, we're picking 6 or 12 checks from what made up the total, and we'd like to see, you know, the check and the purchase order and the invoice and that kind of thing. So it's really more validating, might be the word for what we sent in. So that's moving along. Any questions on any of those before we turn to the numbers?
May I, Mr. Russo?
Sorry, Kate, I was on mute, of course.
Just a quick question, John, and just for my own clarification to make sure I heard you correctly. So all the preliminary requests for the audit have been responded to and the information's been provided, and you said there were 6 things that came back in the last day or so?
Yes, I don't know, Mike Weaver, if you can hear me, but you know, we took a little pride, I guess, in the fact that we had 0 outstanding on 2 occasions, only to find that they gave us some more. I think the last batch yesterday was 6. Are you there, Mike? Can you hear me? Maybe not. I'll if it's anything different, I'll email you first thing in the morning, but that was my recollection. It
Thank
may
you,
have
John.
been 4, but I think it was 6.
John, it looks like Mike is on the call, but he is muted, and I'm not sure if he's in a position where he can mute. I'm not sure, but it looks like this is his phone number.
He just texted, "You can't hear me." All right. Well, sometimes that's a good thing, right, Mike? Okay. Ken, do you want to flip to the next page there? Okay. So you see our summary there in the usual fashion, with the usual line items there. And if you remember last month, we were up around 17 million unencumbered, and I had to give you a list of things that would get encumbered in the next month. Most of those there were a couple things on my list that I realized later we don't encumber. One of them, for example, is employer, FICA, and Medicare.
Who's yelling?
It's Gladys. I'm seeing a signal with Gladys. in front of you.
You don't hear me yelling.
I hear your kids.
I'm sorry, I can't hear over them.
Okay. I was just saying, one of the things that we don't encumber is the employer share of Social Security and Medicare. That's because what happens every 2 weeks when we have payroll and we calculate that and we pay it to the IRS, that's when the expense gets booked up into the records at the time of the payroll. We don't have a way of encumbering that for the year and then having it reduce each time there's a payroll. Unlike salaries where we can do that, it just doesn't work. And that's, I think more than $1 million, might be $1.3 million. So I had that on my list and shouldn't have. But you can see that number start to come down. And as we turn the corner into January, it will continue to go down. So that's the summary.
Excuse me, John.
Yes.
A question.
Yeah.
I'm sure I didn't bring this up before, but last February, we had an unencumbered balance of like 12.4 million. Now we're down to 8.2 in October.
Yep. So we're doing I think last year we were even slower to, and we say encumber, what we do is we do a purchase order for the year. Let's say it were electricity and it were payable to Eversource. And, well, in an ideal world, in July, you prepare that purchase order for 12 months, you enter it into the system and it's all set aside what you think you're going to spend, and you reduce 1/12 a month. But what happens if you're busy with other things, the bills come in, you pay them on time, but you may not have set up your annual forecast, so to speak. This year, we're farther ahead in doing that work than we were a year ago. I think a year ago, we were quite involved in the 2021 audit, and just not as good with the system and didn't have I think the people that we have now. So I think we're ahead of where we were last year. The change in the numbers isn't related to any really change in the forecast.
More or less, with Mike Weaver, additional help on board.
It's been great. Yeah.
The word, that's correct word is more current.
Yes, and I think we've strengthened our grants management too. Mike Scanlon, some of you haven't met, he replaced Michelle, who went up to Sherman to be their business official. Mike comes after a career at IBM as an accountant. So the whole grant management has, I think, has strengthened.
Oh,
So
thank you.
we're in good shape. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. Other questions?
Any other committee members? Kate,
John, can you talk about the undesignated category and just specify what that is, please?
Yeah, so that is made up of two things. Actually, and you'll see this when Kevin talks next. The undesignated was the salary savings that we originally anticipated of $4.7 million. And that's what brought all of our spending down to 150 million. Now, in July, we did three things that changed that number and why it's showing 3.9. The first thing we did was we cut some budgets by about $700,000. All of the school building budgets were cut, the program budget cuts. It was a figure of about 30% of their discretionary or their per pupil spending. And so those cuts came out of the lines up above. So some of the principals cut supplies. So the supply number is lower than it was on June 30th or when we adopted the budget. So that was the first thing. But by lowering the supply number, the 4.7 savings got smaller because you have to balance out at 150. That's the city money. The second thing we did was we found that we had more Alliance grant money than we needed for the staff that we had last year. So we moved 9 positions out of the budget and assigned those to grants. But so that that cut is showing up still in the undesignated column.
Right,
Oh,
and John, I just want to clarify, we received an unanticipated increase in Alliance monies this year to
Right.
cover that 900,000.
Yeah, that allowed us to do it. And then, so that moved to the grants and the $3 million ask, I'll call it, that we have in front of the city, that's the 3.9. And once again, that would have been 4.7 if we hadn't shown those cuts up where they were taken.
Thank you, John. Any other
Okay.
committee members first? Louisa, I know you're in there, but I can't see you on my screen. Any questions?
No, I'm good right now, Al. Thank you.
Teresa,
Okay, Sunday's paper said we laid off several teachers. And I thought that was not the case.
It's not the case. They didn't check with us. I think they wrote that story just either from listening to tapes or from older stories. Sometimes they do, but it just wasn't the case. What we did was we put those positions into the grant fund, into the Alliance fund, as we just described. And no teachers have been laid off. No, nobody's been laid off. Teachers or otherwise.
Is there any way that we could get a hold of them to correct that?
Yeah, you can do that from time to time. I think they're usually open for that, to that.
well, that would have to come from the district, right, John? I mean, not to a board member.
Yeah, I think probably for me, you know, since I was quoted in that. And
I would appreciate that. I mean, we all worked really hard, and to see that on the screen, I feel so bad.
yeah,
I'm sorry, I'm missing something. John, you were quoted as saying that we laid off staff?
no, but I was quoted in the paper from some comments at the ad hoc meeting a month or two ago.
Okay.
I'd
Thank you,
appreciate it.
John. I
Thank you,
appreciate if
John.
you would take care of that.
Yeah, I'll do that in the morning. Sure.
Teresa, are you good?
I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm gonna go off screen. I'm gonna eat.
Okay. I see, any other committee members? Not, I see Gladys's hand up. Yes, Gladys.
Mr. Chairman, and to John, my question is, we're talking about the 3.9 or 3.4, whichever the number seems to fit us, for the reserve for December. Is there a specific reason it would either do us better to have an answer for that reserve before December, or how it's going to affect us as a school district after December?
Yeah, exactly. You're exactly right. The sooner we know, the better, easier it is to plan, and you can come up with a much better plan. You know, particularly in our business, if you can plan things ahead of time, get people ready, talk to people, do things in a smart way. That's always better than when you're rushed and pushed. If we find out much later, it's going to be different than we expect. Sometimes you have fewer choices too as the year goes on. So yeah, it would help.
Okay.
Uh,
And
I'm sorry.
thank
Vlad.
you, John. And through the
Yeah.
chair, my final question is, this audit for 2022 should
Mhm.
be completed by Thanksgiving. And if it's not completed by Thanksgiving, what is our finance, that's not the right terminology, doing to make sure, or do you have any push to make sure that it's completed by Thanksgiving?
But, so we're answering things, within days after we're seeing them. And I think the reason we're not doing it even faster than that is sometimes it takes a little time to dig things out or to talk to people. Our staff here knows there's nothing more important to do in their work other than, the biweekly payrolls and covering those on time. So everything is being, when a request comes in, our regular work's being put aside. Um, what I read today, it was an email, from the partner, asking on what days would he get certain things, um, because he had staff available to look at them. And he reminded us in the email that he still wanted to end by Thanksgiving. So it sounded, at least, remember, the city also has a part to this, but it sounded like, if we could get him his answers quickly, we'd keep everything on track. That's how I was encouraged to see it. Myself, I think there's a lot still on the city side to do, so,
All right.
yeah.
Teresa, go ahead.
Balancing the checkbook, are we up to date yet?
I know we're through June, and I think we're somewhat into the summer. So I would say yes to that.
Because that seemed to be, they complained at one of the early ad hoc committee,
Yeah,
or the auditors.
yeah. We're staying current, but I have to say that, we've been constantly, being asked for things for auditors, and they're forcing us to look backwards all the time. It was last June, we were still looking backwards to the year 2021 and getting checks and copies of this and copies of that. And since August, we've had a huge push on. It's been taken up a lot of time looking back at June of 22 and before that, the summer of 21. And we can't constantly be using the resources we have to look back into old years. And still do your daily work, like the bank reconciliation for this month. You can only do that for so long. And it's been going on a long time, and there's more to come. So, we're keeping up, but we're not doing any extra work, or that's for sure. That we'd like, things that are not necessary that we think we'd just like to do, because it is a burden for sure. And in the checkbook question, Teresa, I know the chairman of the ad hoc committee said, oh, well, I want to see the 2022 audit before we release funds. Well, guess what? The 2022 audit is going to say exactly what we told them it would say a year ago. We didn't return any money. We spent our whole budget. And in the 2023, I think we'll say the same thing. So I just
John,
have to throw that out there.
John, that undesignated 3.9.
Yes.
That is, could you just
Yeah.
allow me and tell me again why that's positions we haven't filled? Is that correct?
Well, so if you remember the budget that we adopted, the budget we asked for had a savings of 4.7 million we thought we would get when we ended the previous year. We
Right.
thought we'd have unfilled positions and savings in health insurance, and it didn't happen. But it was a minus number in our books so that while we plan to spend 154.7 million, we thought we'd have leftover money of 4.7, which is why we asked for 150. Now, since then, in July, we cut other line items like the utilities, which are which are supplies. We cut some school supplies. So we lowered the number of supplies, and that also reduced the undesignated amount because the whole thing had to balance to 150. So the 3.9 is made up of two things. The $3 million we still need to get from the city, and the $900,000 of positions we moved over to the Alliance grant.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yep.
Any other questions? Any other committee members with questions? Going once? Going twice? I see no, they say my screen is limited in who I can see. I see Julie Milano in there in the background, once I start flipping my, okay. Right, folks, no further questions, let's move on to the next item. Go ahead, John.
The rest of the report. So the next couple of pages, Ken, if you want to flip through them, those are it's a breakdown of the line items themselves. We still haven't balanced some of the lines we should be balancing there and covering with minuses. Some of the big things that show up, talk about the teacher line there. If you remember last month, we mentioned that we budgeted many of the new positions in a different line. It's way at the bottom. Ken, if you want to scroll down, it's probably a couple from the end. Can you keep going down a little more? Right there. I'm sorry, one more. Where's that? It's probably one more. Sorry, there it is. You see that enrollment impact staff? That's where we put all of our new positions, and they were new. If you remember, we were folding in the ESSER 2 grant, and I forget how that might have had 15 positions. And I think with enrollment increases, I believe our ask was for 31 new positions. But what we did was we isolated it onto this single line so that we could keep track of it, able to explain it if people had questions. Now, what we should do is, you can see that budget, nothing is spent against it. I need to move that 4.5 million up to the regular teaching line and to the counselor line above it. We haven't done that work yet. But that's a big part. And by the way, Al, if you look at the bottom two right numbers there, there's your 3.9 million you were just asking about.
There you go.
One we say allocated staff to grants, and the other that's the city ask.
John, is there any way that you can make those numbers a little bit bigger, please? Because I can't see nothing that you're saying.
Yep. Can you, Ken, make that larger? There it is.
That is much better.
One more. Yep. So I was talking about three numbers on the page, Alice. The 4.5 million, that's where we showed our new staff, and then the number Al was pointing out earlier is there.
All right. Thank you, John.
And yeah, and I think what we'll do if the committee, I imagine the committee still wants, is we'll try and show our transfers next month. That was a good tool you asked us to do a year or so ago, where we can make sure all the things are covered as we head towards June. I think because it was, again, through October, we felt we could maybe go another month without it. Questions on the line items?
Hey,
Quick question, John. You said that
Yep.
the 4.5 for the enrollment impact is going to be distributed above to the teachers and the counselors.
I think so, yeah. Mhm.
So when I add those two numbers together, I'm getting 5.1.
It's positive. We keep track, but I'll have to go through and match all these up. We keep a record in HR of what we're hiring new people at, how it compares to the people that left. And right now we think we're where we thought we'd be, which is, to spend the money we budgeted, including trying to fill those positions. So if you could, let me take a look at it and report next month. But from our operating information, we don't think we're behind there.
John, once again,
Yep.
last year, the custodial deficit
Right.
was a number, and already I'm seeing a deficit on that line item. What, 1, 2, 3, 4 from the bottom?
Yep. If there should be another line down the list for overtime. If you remember, we budget the overtime as there it is. I think you just pat right in the middle there, 335,000. Because we know we're going to have overtime, football games on Saturday and things at night. We don't know which custodians are going to pick that overtime or get forced into that overtime. So rather than budget it by person, we put it on a line item there. So one of the things we did last year is I moved that money up into the custodial line. It's probably the time to do that again.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions?
May I ask another question, please?
Go ahead. Floor is yours.
John, can you just speak, do we have a line for tutors, special ed tutors?
Yeah, so that's a good one. And I don't understand how it started. I do know it's a bear to change. Howard, if you could stop there. Yeah, right there. So for whatever reason, so you saw the lines in the beginning, the salaries, the benefits, the big lines, the salary lines, all our expenditure lines start with the number 5. That means expenditure. And then if the next number is a 1, it's salaries. If it's a 2, it's a benefit. If it's a 6, it's a supply. But for whatever reason, the tutors, and we have quite a few of those, are not budgeted in the 100 lines. They're budgeted down in the 300 lines, and you'll see them right there. Tutors special ed, $4.0 million. We have a balance here of a million, almost $1.3 million. Those are salaries and wages. Those are our tutors. I guess I could move them at some point, but then we'll lose the history. You'd have to restate it all. But that number, you've heard of the vacancies we have. That's where it's showing up. But remember, we're going to use some of that and some of the money from the vacancies that have occurred to help pay for the higher than budgeted para settlement. The first year of that settlement was, I think, around 7%. We had budgeted 4%. And when we talked about how could we pay for 7, we need it, we said, we'll take it from this line. We've been running vacancies now for a couple months. Some of that will move.
Will any of that also apply to the special ed transportation costs? As I see we're running about $1 million in the hole for that.
Yeah, we were just talking about this afternoon. I need to speak with Kelly. I'm not sure what's going on there. We're not doing a whole lot more transportation than we've done in other years. We have changed some of the providers. We bid that every year, and it could be that we've encumbered it with the bus company STA, instead of with, you see some of the white vans that are around, say carrying school children. I have to take a closer look at that because we're moving about the same number of kids as a year ago.
Teresa,
Thank you.
put your hand up.
Oh,
Yeah. Hmm.
the, uh, on the news, they were talking about a settlement for the tutors. Will this impact our budget?
I'm not sure what part of it they were talking about. Were they talking about the pension aspect that's in front of the city council?
It'll have to go in front of the city council. It's been,
Okay, yeah.
I just heard it on the news today. I didn't know we had
Okay.
a thing for,
Well-
a litigation for tutors.
The tutors, this goes back a few years, sued the city to get into the city pension plan. The paraeducators who are in the same bargaining unit have been members of the city pension plan, but the tutors were not. They took the city to court and they won. Now, when we settled the para contract with salary increases and working conditions for the paras and the tutors, we built into the labor contract the fact that the tutors had won their lawsuit. And when I say built it in, what we did was we did the same thing that's happened, we've done with all of the other bargaining units that are non-certified, non-teachers, not in the teacher retirement plan. And what we did was there's a contribution that both the paras and now the tutors have to make into the plan out of their paychecks every 2 weeks. I think it, depending on how long they've been with us, it's either 1, 2, or 3%. Certainly the new tutors, new paras, 3% of their salary has to go in to the city plan, just like Social Security or something like that. And you as a board settle your labor contracts, and normally once you settled it or ratified it, that would be the end of it. In this particular case, it has to go to the city council because the pension plan is their plan. They're the only ones that can allow new members in it. They're the only ones that can change the benefits, the summary document. So the item in front of them will be to recognize that they lost the lawsuit and now let them into the plan. They have to take a formal action. And what they'll see, it comes with the same provisions as the other bargaining units that recently have changed, like the nurses and I think the secretaries. So I don't imagine they'd have a reason to say no. Now, none of that comes out of the Board of Education budget. It's just employee contributions, and then the city always picks up their share of the pension plan. A good question though, Teresa, for sure. It's kind of complicated.
Yeah, okay, thank you. But
Yeah.
are we, after last year's spending spree and the medical line, are we better covered this year for that same line?
So we have a consultant broker we've had for many years, the Gallagher Company, well known. We meet with them monthly, and they tell us how we're doing on claims. And the last time we met, they said, according to their information, we were right on target or right about where, if nothing changed, we would come in at or around budget come June. So based on their advice, we're not expecting, they didn't say expect a big increase like you did a year before. We did talk to them about last year's phenomenon with a kind of a spike in the number of high cost cases they were seeing. And they didn't think that upward trajectory would continue or that there was anything that would change landing on budget this year. So so far it's looking as planned.
Any other questions? Going once?
Oh, Gladys.
I think Gladys, I just got a message that she might have to hop off to go to another meeting.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, ma'am.
if there's no other question from your committee meetings, members, could I ask a question, please?
Please, go ahead.
And if it's silly, or John, you don't think it would be appropriate, if we look at those items that we call deficit items, instead of plugging them into the overall budget, would it be more feasible that people, especially we have new people coming on, can see what those deficit items are going to be and what they're going to look like when we get into discussion? Or is that extra work that we really don't think that we need to do?
No, I think that's a great idea. Yeah, because sometimes the deficits can come two ways. Either something unexpected happens that you didn't plan, or you just didn't plan right and plan too low. So I think those would be healthy discussions. Yeah, let's try it next month.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Just
Gladys.
clarification, in other words, keep the deficit lines there for next month? Is that it?
I kind of heard it, Teresa, to make sure to talk about them and point them out and explain why they're that way.
Thank you.
I
Thank
think
you,
that-
John.
Yeah.
All right. Anyone else? Anyone else? Mr. Superintendent, is it time to have our discussion about next year's budget?
Looks like we are ready.
Okay. Floor is yours, sir.
All right. John, I will share my screen. Give me 1 second.
Okay.
Okay. And so I want to use this opportunity to bring to everyone's attention where we were last year. So last year, not around this time, but a little earlier in the process this year so far. But what we wanted to do was make sure we brought the committee's attention back to where we ended last year when we submitted our budget book. And made kind of projections for where we thought we would be for the 24-25 school year. And so prior to John and, prior to my tenure as superintendent, the second really, we started to receive ARPA relief monies. We talked about the fact that we were using these monies to fund our enrollment growth and that there will be a financial cliff. That we will continue to approach a financial cliff and a significant investment would be needed to avoid one. And so my first slide here is just to kind of recap of where we left off last year. And so this is in the bigger budget book, and just want to bring your attention to the line 24-25. And so you will see here in ESSER 3, in ESSER 3, we have the 11.4 remaining. ESSER 2 has since expired in technically September of 2023. CARES Act expired the 2 years prior. And then you see our reoccurring and sustainable grants that are coming in here. And so last year, when we were projecting our 24-25 budget, we had identified $150 million of funding need Again, and John has talked about, and we've talked about a couple of times, with some anticipated savings to the 154. And so that's why you see the 150 number here. But given that the ESSER 3 numbers would be expiring, and again, this is how we have paid for our enrollment over the last number of years. We had an anticipated bump from Alliance from 22, which is around what we received this year. And next year, anticipating 24. Again, this was at the time we were looking at those adjustments. I do have an update on what we anticipate Alliance to be next year. We did minimal growth in title, IDA, and other grants just because we didn't have that information available to us. But we do have a little bit more certainty around Alliance. So I just want to make sure I report that at the end of this presentation. So I do recall kind of the response in the room when we talked about what we projected our need to be going from 150 to 169. And I don't mean 169 as the 169 out of 169, meaning we would need we projected last year that we would need approximately $19 million bump to help, number one, address the gap for ESSER 3 funding, but also address any anticipated growth that we continue to experience. And so here's a look back, and John, I'll do this slide and ask you to jump in, and then I'll come back in at the end with you. And so here you will see grants and city contribution going back to 17-18. And so this graph is showing the percentage of contributions from the city and then percentage of contribution from grants. And so going back from 17-18, and just to give you an idea, total budget was $175 million in 17-18. In which about 73% was coming from the contribution from the city, and around 27% was coming from a collection of grants. And then you'll see the same thing happening year over year over year. And
I think you're muted, Kevin.
I'm sorry, John, thank you. And bring to the committee's attention, we'll see here these numbers, particularly during our years of growth. I don't know if this bar is blocking you like it's blocking me. There it is. And so in 18-19, 19-20, 20-21, 21-22, 22-23, when we've continued to experience growth in this district, and you'll see what the numbers from the city contribution has been, essentially from 128 to 132, 132 to 135, 135 to 135, 135 to 136, and then the increase for 136 to 141, and then the 141 to 150 bump. These years from 17-18 to 2021, we experienced significant growth in the district. Typically, and you'll see in our carryover grant, and for those of you who have been on the committee and the board now for some time, we've used the language just to keep the lights on. And so that's without any additional staff, but just to carry the same exact staff over from one year to the next, typically cost the district between $4 to $6 million. And so these years, going from 128 to 132, 132 to 135, we were not even able to, quite frankly, cover the cost of turning the lights on and turning over the staff. That was without any regard for the enrollment growth in a district at that time. And so the gap was filled with increases in grants. And so that's how this district has kept afloat for a number of years now. It was the increase in grants that was in covering enrollment growth. And so we got the big spike of enrollment growth in elementary and middle school. It really started to come in 18-19, 19-20, 20-21. But we were fortunate in that we benefited from the relief monies and sustainable grants that we've had in this district for some time. And so we benefited from those monies, those revenues coming in. The challenge, however, is those revenues are now expiring. And again, you can see how these two got closer to each other because 21, 22, 22, 23, we have ESSER, we have the ESSER grants plus the sustained grants, and we significantly close the gap between the contribution by the city and the grants. But now with it expiring, you will now see a gap that needs to be filled. And from our perspective, it's going to need to be filled from the city. Although, again, I do have some good news about an update regarding Alliance funding. And so, John, I'll give the overview of this slide. It is essentially an overview of all of our grants in totality, which includes Alliance, Title I, Title II. Alliance right now is about $22 million. We have Title I. These are two bigger grants. Title I is approximately $4 million. And then the other grants are really in kind of filling up the rear to get up to the $50 million. And so Title II, Title III, Title IV, all of our federal grants. Alliance, of course, is our state grant. And two of the other bigger grants that help with support services is our LEAP grant. And that's, we have two phases of the LEAP grant right now, which is helping with learner engagement and attendance program. And so a lot of our family liaisons are funded through this strategy. And frankly, given our needs and requirements for the budget, I anticipate we're going to have to remove the vast majority of them in LEAP for next year. But you will see by this graph, over 60% of grants is dedicated to salary. And so everywhere where we were allowed or acceptable to maximize grants for positions, we have done so. And then, of course, the next biggest expenditure, of course, is benefits. And you'll see it's over $6 million in benefits here. And then the other professional services you'll see here. And again, it really depends on the grant, which has helped. It has conditions in terms of how we can plug positions or services or supplies into them. And John, can you walk us through these next couple of slides? What kind of speaks to where we are now?
Yeah. So I called it here the COVID grant. That's ESSER 3. And although we thought it would be a little higher in that cliff slide from last year, when we started the year in July, there was 10.5 million still remaining. And you see there, 8.5 million is earmarked for salaries. And I think this is every year, every budget has a different story depending what it is. And this is the story of next year's budget, that the ESSER 3, the final COVID grant, has expired. We have these positions, essential teaching positions, that like a year ago, we'd like to put into the operating budget to maintain them, but that pushes the operating budget up. So that you want to go to the next one, Ken? And then we could go back to each of these. Or yeah, there it is. Okay, this is a budget driver as well. I called it Danbury High School overcrowding. I will come up with a better description. But when we sat down with Principal Donovan and his staff, what we heard about was, we were supposed to have Cardis open next year. It's not going to be open. That doesn't mean that the kids didn't come. They came. They've been coming for a couple years. What he pointed out to us was that the number of, I think he said it this way. He said when he added up the 11th grade, or this year's 11th grade, 10th grade, 9th grade, and 8th grade, that being the high school next year, it's more than 3,900 kids. Right now we're at 3,700. Just a year ago, we were at 3,500. And he needs teachers because you have to have so many classes, and just to offer the classes, he needs the teachers. So he went through that he needs a number of teaching positions. Those full-time positions carry benefits. But what he also pointed out is with 400 or 500 extra kids, we need things like more buses in the morning and the afternoon. Our buses are crowded, and we can't, there just is very little room to add an extra couple hundred kids. We've done that, and they're crowded. So we think we'll need 6 more buses. Now, they will be used certainly when we open the academies and the Cardis building. But Dan's message, and it was hard not to agree with him, is the kids are here now and we need to do things. He even needs things like more student desks and chairs. Just doesn't have enough. So you see there on the supply line, it's not just books and learning materials, it's desks and chairs. So when we added all of that up, and I think probably a good idea, like we did last year, have Dan come in one of the nights to so you can hear from him. But it's another $1.9 million for high school enrollment growth.
Right. And John, I just wanted to add, because I don't think we've finalized what the projected cost would be on this.
Right.
And correct me if I'm wrong, and if I'm wrong, I'm happy to hear that actually. But in discussions with Dan, and I think the committee and the board has seen pictures of, if you haven't been there personally, I've seen pictures of what our cafeteria looks like at the high school right now. And so we have 900 plus students eating lunch at one time, more students than, quite frankly, we can fit at cafeteria tables, and also sitting outside as well. Dan has been able to accommodate space for students by using the umbrellas and tables outside. And our students go out there, really, even during inclement weather, a lot of our students still go outside. The committee and some of our board members might also recall during year 1, year 2 of COVID, we had explored the idea of looking into and costing out tents for outside for our kids to be able to physically sit outside to be fed. So that is something that we are exploring as a district. Understanding that Dan is just, quite frankly, it's just not safe for all of the students to be in the cafeteria eating lunch every day. And because he just doesn't have the physical space to accommodate them. And going to a 5th period of lunch is just not feasibly possible within our schedule. I mean, we essentially have lunch almost every period of the day, and just don't have the supervision to accommodate for it. And so when I reviewed these numbers years ago, before we reopened our schools, we were talking hundreds of thousands of dollars in order to have the tents outside, have them heated during inclement weather, making sure we have enough appropriate exit availability inside and outside of the tents. Then it comes at an additional cost to pay staff to supervise inside the tents during inclement weather, because the walls have to be closed in. And so that is something we are costing out. Again, if we're going to be close to 4,000 students in the building, and the students are here, the bubble that was at the higher end in middle school and elementary school a couple of years ago, Dan is getting that last big bubble of that enrollment at the high school next year. And so, the fact that the building was delayed at the Cardis site, for 1 year does not change our reality in terms of having close to 4,000 kids in the district at the 9-12 level at this time. And so the projections in that regard was right on. And, unfortunately, we don't have the physical plan to open the building to accommodate the kids right now, but we are in need of needing something for the high school immediately to make sure that building is safe to accommodate. Sorry, Dan. Sorry, John.
That's okay. Next slide. Okay. A couple other things we see happening. These might be a little softer, or things we can discuss as we get into the budget building. But we believe the Carter's building will be ready in the spring. And what this first column suggests occupying it in April of 2025, part of the 24-25 budget. And what I've built in there is just a salary for one administrator, I'm sorry, two administrators and benefits for two people. Those would be academy related administrators. We had a conversation, as you know, about that at the board meeting last time. But I built that in. And but when we occupy the building, we're responsible for the utilities, the heating, the air conditioning, whatever's in there. So I estimated 3 of the 12 months of utilities and maintenance costs and things like that at $400,000. That was on recommendation from Rich Jalbert. That number needs a lot more analysis. For those of you who went on the walkthrough a couple weeks ago, the heating systems certainly are not there. Nothing's there. So predicting what it's going to cost is going to take a real sharp pencil but before more construction goes on. But we'll find a way to do that. And then just some of the supplies that we'll need to get the building organized. We can't wait until July to move in if school's going to start in August. So we'll have some activity going on over there. Then the middle column, you're going to see a request for more technology. I've combined two things, technology and security, to kind of emerging issues. But as we become more technological, particularly in the classrooms, fewer and fewer textbooks now are paper copy. So much of the books and materials are digital, and we're just doing more and more all the time with our kids, for our kids. That expense is something that's going to continue to grow. We also want to keep pace with security and what needs to be done there, whether it's replacing cameras, walkie-talkies, items of that nature. We'll have some specifics for you on that. And then at the moment, we've had instructional staff being recommended for 14 new positions. Some of those are at the middle school. And we haven't taken a close look at that. We certainly will before the next time we meet. This recommendation came in from our CRC folks, if you will, the program leaders on the instructional side. They've looked at some of the areas where we think we're weak, and they're requesting some additional staff. So I think there's one more slide, Kevin, coming up. Okay. Yeah, so I just combined the couple things we've talked about. The Paris settlement will push our budget up $500,000. So I'm right now I'm calling that a budget driver, as well as because it's something new. It's not keeping the lights on like you'll hear us talk about. It's a change, as well as the new special ed mandate. And what I'm budgeting there is the same amount that we had in front of you last month for this year. We have kids that age, some of whom are out of district, some have in-district programs. So you can see there's a breakout of the expenses. But what I like to do is if something's new compared to the current year, then I'll try and highlight it or call it a driver or something like this, so we can see what's really pushing the budget and why. And I think that's the last, right?
Okay.
Questions on any of those? Yeah.
Teresa, I see your hand up.
Sorry.
You're muted, Teresa. Teresa, you are muted. Oh, well.
We expect to be in the Cardis building spring of 2025. Does that mean classes as well?
No,
No,
that
just
would,
offices, Teresa.
So you're going to hire administration when there's no classes yet?
yes, we think there'll be plenty to do to get a high school off the ground. That just waiting till July might be too late. Um, Honestly, I think we need the person, even if we didn't occupy the building. There's just so much that has to be done.
Will that also be the superintendent's staff as well will be moving in?
Eventually, yes, it's being designed that way. We really haven't finished those conversations about timing and things like that.
Right.
And-
It really just depends on when the building is ready to be occupied. And as John said, once it's ready to be occupied, we will begin to get the bills, the monthly invoices to keep the building open. We anticipate when it's ready to be occupied, that means our offices can start to move over. What we are understanding to be true is, I don't think we budgeted for this yet or gotten projections on this. This is going to come at a significant cost to move the school and move offices. And so we will certainly save on our leases from, July moving forward at those places that we're looking to come out of the lease. But to physically move the various offices that will occupy that space and then eventually move the high school into that space and move all of the staff plus their materials is going to come at a significant cost, not to mention the time and labor it's going to cost to get us there.
Can I ask one more question?
Please.
So the cliff now is $19 million.
That's the projections last year. It's higher. Stay tuned, Teresa.
Uh,
Hey,
I just want to clarify, John, one thing on the slides. So, I saw that on the addressing the overcrowding at the high school, we're talking about 1.3 million for teacher salaries and benefits. So when you talk about the new staff hire of 14 different positions, those are all middle school or elementary?
Yes, or district-wide, but
Okay.
my recollection is
I'm sorry,
mostly
Kate,
middle
the new
school.
positions are primarily high school with a few middle school positions in them.
On that other slide,
Right.
Mr. Walston?
And I will go back to look at the slides just to make sure we're both referring to the same one.
so that 1.3 million is for high school.
I'm referring to two different slides. So the first slide was specific to DHS overcrowding. And that was a hire of,
let me grab it.
Right.
I don't think
I'll put
the
it back up.
positions were
I'll put it back up.
specified.
There was I'm sorry.
So
Let me talk about the
salaries
other one.
and benefits there.
Yeah, those are entirely high school staff on that page. The other page I called from the CRC, I have it in front of me. There's a Rogers Park, two foreign language teachers, world language teachers at one at Rogers Park, one at Broadview, and then two bilingual paras speaking Spanish or Portuguese, a PSYOP coach, and 4 bilingual teachers, 2 Spanish, 2 Portuguese for science, math, social studies. Those would be at the high school. They were not in Dan's list.
So these are just new positions.
Yeah, they almost
I'm
all.
trying to,
It looks like it's all ESL bilingual or primarily.
and that was on
K8.
the first slide. Is that right, John?
We have a summative slide at the end, Kate. We just took a pause because there were questions, but it's all going to come together. they're separate now, but they will come together on a summative slide.
Okay. I just want to make sure I understand correctly that the full-time staff members on this slide, for example, are not an overlap of
Right,
Of this
the
slide.
overcrowding projection on the first slide, right?
yes, they're not.
Okay, thank you.
Open to
Okay.
continue.
Any more questions, Mr. Russo, before I go back to the slides?
I don't see any other hands up. Any other members with a question?
One
Well,
quick question.
Go ahead.
So we don't have a budget yet for the operational costs of the academy yet?
We do.
We do.
Yeah, we saw that at our last board meeting, but that's the following year. That
25, 26.
25, 26, which is July 1 of 25 begins.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Anyone else? Do you have a summary screen for us, Kevin?
I do. And John talked about John left off with the para contract and just a quick overview of enrollment projections. And so these projections are real numbers in terms of what we have now. These are not SLAM's enrollment projections. And so this is with the roll-up of the middle school students that we have now, and that will inform our new ninth grade for next year. You'll see our ninth graders are moving up to 10, and 10 moving up to 11, 11 moving up to 12. You'll see there's in all of the pluses, we have a plus. All of the pluses specifically just for the high school is really what Dan is dealing with right now. And so to John's point that he had highlighted earlier, this means a little over 3,900 students at the high school. And capital budget needs, and I believe we had gone over this previously at our sites and facilities meeting, but just wanted to give a quick scan of what we will be submitting to the city. This will not be reflected in our budget ask, but these are proposed capital budget items that will be reviewed and shared with the city soon. I'm going to move on to the next slide. And propose operations budgets. And then this is not to be confused with capital budget, the things that we are anticipating working on independent of the capital budget for the 23-24 school year. I'm sorry, for the 24-25 school year. And you'll see that budget increase is approximately $70,000 extra from last year. And so going back to KSI and MRP, continuing to update the flooring at those two respective schools, including the vestibule at MRP. If you guys have been there recently, it's still the same old flooring that's been there for years. Wall dividing for workroom at Shelter Rock. By contract, we're supposed to have a workroom available for staff that we currently do not have because we had to take space for enrollment growth at the building. At Pembroke, a fence area at that site, just to make sure we can safely have that area fenced over at the building. Apparently that fence is in significant decay and needs to be upgraded. Gym floor at Pembroke as well. And you'll see the $80,000 numbers there. District-wide restroom repairs, air water bottle filter replacement, that has gone over well so far in the district. A lot of the old water fountains have been replaced across the district. And so this is another attempt to continue to implement and install more across the entire community. And just going back to some more upgrades at Haystown, the flooring repair in the vestibule, which is required, and the exterior sidewalk. And this is an access issue, ADA compliance issue for us. Exterior sidewalk to connect the fields for the wheelchair accessibility at $80,000. And so you'll see that increase from 684 to 770. And I believe at the beginning of this school year, Rich Jalbert and Mike Seelig, they shared some overview of some of the work that had been done, and really just a continuation of getting the building and continue our annual maintenance of the school buildings.
Kevin, is that last slide been massaged at all any of those numbers? I just look at a few, I look, thinking from memory, a couple of them looked a little bit different. From our last.
I'm not aware of any changes, Al.
Okay, oh, that's good. All
But
right.
I can ask Mike, and it's something, an update perhaps he can give at our next meeting. I'll write it down now.
Teresa,
How are we doing with the HVAC grants? Or is that another issue that we shouldn't cover?
No,
I
I
mean-
think Mike gave an update at our last sites and facilities meeting. That is on target to be submitted for December. And we are partnering with the city to make sure we are aligned. And it's really a grant that is a reimbursable grant, Teresa. And so we have to make sure we have the money to do work on something, and then we will get reimbursed. If we don't have the money up front to handle so for example, I think when the grant first came out, I think there was a misinterpretation, if you will, of the intentionality of the grant. And so I think a lot of people thought we would be able to go out and just get HVACs in all of our buildings and get new air conditioners in all of our buildings. In fact, we thought so as well. But first, we need the city to make the investment into a new HVAC system, as an example, at a school. So let's just say South Street. The city and the district had an interest in having air conditioning at South Street Elementary School. So first, we would need the city of Danbury to put the money up for and actually fund the project. And then the city this would now make the city available for reimbursement, I think up to 63%. And then of course, between the city and the district, we need to figure out a way to fill a gap for the other 27% in that case. And so part of our submission of capital submissions projects is in alignment with the grant itself. And so if we can get the city to commit to some of these projects, some of them will also be reimbursable. And that's kind of where the collaboration begins. And so I think we have a lot more better understanding, number one, the grant, and two, the collaboration is there between the city and the district to try to make it happen. And I can ask Mike to speak to it again. I believe he spoke to it at the last sites meeting where he talked about some of those projects. And John, I don't know if you remember some of the things that have been submitted, but there's been a lot of conversations about the projects themselves. And so we're anticipating the city will accept those projects knowing that they're going to get reimbursed on them.
Yeah.
And
So-
hopefully that will now play a role in another investment for another project.
So,
I'm
but
sorry,
none of
exactly.
this is not noted here or on the capital thing. It's not noted, right?
No, because Mike had addressed it in his meeting in sites and facilities. But like I said, I can ask him to give an update and maybe underscore the ones that are going to be reimbursable. And so, like, for example, here are some right here. I believe these are the ones that we are in collaboration with the city. Air conditioning unit, $100,000. Air conditioning system, South Street School, West Side Middle School, Morris Street School, ACE, air balancing at all of our schools. And so the idea is these will all be eligible for reimbursement. And that's why we are submitting them for capital projects. Because typically you wouldn't see this, us asking for air conditioning system at one of our schools. We need it because frankly, in order to make sure we can have a space to accommodate our request for summer school, we need buildings that are air conditioned, and those numbers are continuing to grow. So this is kind of an example of it. And again, I can ask Mike to give a more detailed
Thank you.
update. You're welcome. And going back to the operations budget itself. And so for 23-24 currently, we have 41 advocates budgeted. And so our recommendation is to get to 43. Those 2 additional advocates would be at the high school. Facilities repairs, I just reviewed that with you. It's 684,000, a slight increase of 70K to 780,000. My IT services, and this is something, prior to the pandemic, we received a lot of grants to support the growth and development of technology in our school district. Those grants have now subsided and expired, and so now these are, frankly, services that we are providing for kids and for the system. And so IT services, you see a over $300,000 increase in IT services, and then just part of our annual maintenance for laptops for students and staff. You see a slight increase of $25,000 from 23-24 to 24-25, from 1.35 to 1.375.
That chart, the difference in the two columns, that's the budget driver. When I showed you 785,000, this was the backup 1 year to the next.
And then our last slide, John, if we can go from, left to right, you'll see at the top, our salaries under this current year are $83 million. And that was proposed, expected is $83 million. Projected for next year is 88,311,936. This is our typical rollover budget. So John, can you walk the committee through just the top portion of what they are looking at right now? Because this is the keep the lights on budget. This is what the cost would be from next year if everything stayed the same. That's how I think it's best to kind of explain that to the committee. John?
Yeah, exactly. I think in my slide, I called it current programs and services. Keep the lights on, same thing, where we know a lot about the changes. For example, a number of our labor contracts are settled for multi-year purposes, so it's not hard to put in the different increases. I mentioned Gallagher, the consultant we have. They've recommended along with us, a increase in health insurance next year of 6%. So we've built that in. Won't be getting any more advice on that number before we meet again in January. Same with some of the other lines, our bus contract, that's a $10 million item. That still has another year or two to go. I think it's a 4% increase next year. We have good ideas on special ed tuitions and things like that. Supplies, we base those primarily on our expected enrollment and so much per pupil. The lines after that enrollment impact and equipment, that's primarily the new positions we talked about earlier. When I showed you that 4.5 million line item, that's the enrollment impact. There's equipment, some other things, but those positions, which primarily came from ESSER 2 last year, we're going to keep those in the request column as well. But what we did on this chart, it's too bad we didn't talk about this one first. There's the breakdown, the next three items of that 4.7 million that we thought we'd start the year with. You can see 900,000 was moved into grants we talked about. There are the cuts that we took to our supplies and utilities and things like that. And then the shortfall, that's what's in front of the ad hoc committee. So when you look at the first column, and then the proposed, and the next column is the expected, we're expecting less than the 154 because we've cut our budgets. That's the difference between what was there before. And then what we think that will cost next year is, and we probably should emphasize this too when we get the chance, the current year budget next year, we think that's going up about 6%, and that's not too far from what inflation was. But we have to make up that 3 million again to get in there. So that's about actually the 4 million, that's 3%. So to go from 150 million to 163, that's closer to a 9% increase, which again, 6% coming from keeping the lights on going forward. So,
Right. And so, and I just want to pause for a second and just say, this is the number just to carry forward our budget with the existing staff that we have. And I'm just going to say this in a little different way, not necessarily better, but just different. The 150 number that we asked for last year, we asked for 150 because, again, we had savings that we thought that we can pre-purchase things for this school year. And I know everyone in this call knows that story now. We were not able to do that. But it doesn't change our reality. Our budget, however, is still 153. That's what it costs to expect it to move the district forward for this year. So what John is saying is what I'm hearing. Our reality was 150 in terms of numbers until we have an answer to the monies in the reserves. And we would be moving from 150 to 163 without any more students, without any additional enrollment, and without any request of new positions to address that enrollment. John?
Yeah.
You keep going.
Yeah, and so below that, those are the same things we just talked about. Instead of horizontally, we're showing them vertically here. You'll recognize some of those numbers. The ESSER grant, remember that was primarily 2 or 3 lines. The special ed mandate, academy staffing, and so on. The technology, there's that number again, you just saw. And then the high school overcrowding, this is probably a better word, call it the DHS overflow. That's what you saw, as I described, coming from the principal and his staff going down. So what we've put in there, those are new costs. And then the other positions, we just talked about some of the bilingual and ESL cost as well. I think going down a column like this, a little easier to explain, I think, than going across like I did in the beginning.
I'm sorry, John, you want to just go through the rest of the document so you can get to here?
Oh, sure. Well, we have the SPED, the age 22. The academy, that's the April 1 occupancy. We're describing as a spring transition. See the 200, that's the salary number and the benefits, and utilities, I think you remember that as 400,000, the supplies. The technology, again, that chart that had the 2 columns, that's the difference between one column and the other, and there are things like devices and enhancements, and but it's also some security improvements there, the number of security guards. That's where that comes from. And then below that, Danbury High School overflow, that's what I was calling overcrowding, but those are the numbers right from that other list, the staffing and their benefits, the services, that's primarily the transportation for more buses, some supplies, that's the furniture I talked about for the extra kids. And then finally is we call it the academic support staff. We'd started to talk about that. It's middle school and elementary, and it's primarily world language teachers and ESL and bilingual teachers as well. So you add those up, it's $16 million, and you can see we've put some totals together after that. So it's, the cliff is here. As Kevin showed in the very first slide, we knew this would happen, and this is what it looks like. when you get there. So
Question.
Yep.
For the 24-25 budget, what is our anticipated increase in Alliance funds? Or funding from the state?
Yeah,
You wanna
good
mention
question,
that,
Mr.
Kevin?
Russo. I'm sorry, what'd you say, John?
do you want to mention that one?
Sure,
That's-
sure,
yeah.
sure. So, our bigger grants, sustainable grants, and the one that we've been talking about for a few years now, and that of course is ECS/Alliance for us. And as this committee knows, we have made efforts to find ways to accelerate the funding of Alliance over the last couple of years. Again, we did see a slight bump in Alliance this year for the 23-24 school year of about $1 million additional dollars, which is why we were able to move over to 919,000, as John had alluded to earlier. And for the last couple of months, we've been trying to get clarity on what our anticipated spike would be for 24-25, and then what that spike would be once fully funded at 25-26. So currently we are at a little over $22 million from Alliance. Next year, phase one of the acceleration, we are anticipating a $7 million bump from 22 million to 29 million. In 25-26, we are anticipating a fully funded bump from 29 million to 34 million. And so these numbers come at a very good time, obviously. It doesn't fill all of our gaps that we've just talked about this evening in our meeting. But certainly the bump in Alliance comes at a really good time. And we don't have clarity yet on our Title I monies. We typically receive about a $2 million increase year over year. And that typically covers the growth in salaries for us for the positions that we have in there. But this is, really good news in terms of the Alliance. And again, this is a preliminary number right now, but it comes at a really good time, obviously, when we are going to need it. And the fact that we're going to go from 22 to 34 in the next two budget seasons positions us well to help fill the gaps. But we still need an answer from local funding to help address the need. And I think what John and I have been working hard on, and this is something I think we've stayed away. It's something that I certainly have stayed away from in my short time here as superintendent, and that's not to go back and talk about what the investment has not looked like in the district for years. But I think it's important for the committee and the board to understand just the history of funding from local tax dollars. And I've been here since 1819, and we have grown 800 to 1,000 students in that time. And it was the last 2 years that we certainly have had an opportunity to experience some increases in local funding here in the district. Prior to that, we had years of negative increases in local monies and a history of 1%, 2%, 3% increases, which did not cover, not to mention, forget about enrollment growth, did it cover? It didn't even cover our Turn the Lights On budget. And our ESSER funds came at a really good time to help address, quite frankly, enrollment growth amongst others, and fixed a lot of issues for us that we did not have the ability to address ourselves. And we're here now into the financial cliff. We are facing it, and certainly need some answers for the gap that still remains after the $7 million from Alliance. There's still some questions about how, obviously, the $5 million in reserve that we requested for this year. Teresa, you had asked a question at a previous meeting, what is the plan if we don't get those monies? I am working with the team to make sure there are enough cuts and freezes in spending to make sure in the event we don't get those monies that we can end the year in the positives, and we will, without cutting staff in the district. But whether that $5 million comes now or later, we're going to need it because it ultimately just addresses our bottom line.
Kevin, any whispers, and I say whispers anecdotally, about any federal money, Washington money coming in from DC?
I
Future-
have not heard anything about any additional monies coming in. Outside of the state monies, from Alliance.
All right, thank you.
I've not heard no, I have not.
You know, Al, one of the things, though, there's also regular state aid that goes to the city. Some of it is earmarked education, and it helps with the burden. The state of Connecticut does 2-year budgets. Next year will be the second of 2 years, and the budget right now has the same state aid next year as this year. However, the Assembly does get together before the second year to look over revenue estimates, and it's not been unheard of that they change the aid to municipalities if the economy's in a good place. And, I think some people think the economy in Connecticut is doing okay. So that might bode well. But there's also discussions beginning about the cliff. We are hardly the only one going through this. And what people are beginning to realize is that the urban districts are feeling it much worse than their suburban counterparts for a couple reasons. One, they had more than we did to start with. And second, we got bigger grants than they did that we're now giving up. And so there's discussion of maybe making that fall a little softer and doing something for districts like ourselves and facing a big cliff. That's only just started. It started to get some press, but we should keep our eye on that one.
Thank you, John.
Yep.
Okay,
A couple quick questions. Mr. Walston, you mentioned a 5 million drawdown. I thought it was 3.7.
I'm sorry, Kate. John, what is
It was almost a $5 million gap. I think that's what Kevin was talking about. But
Initially,
with the
yeah.
cuts and the ask in front of the council is 3 million right now. So
Okay, thank
both
you.
numbers are right.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure. I appreciate the clarification. And then if you could throw that last slide up on the screen for a second. I want to ask a question, but I think it's helpful to have that visual.
Okay, I'm trying to find it now. Give me 1 second, Kate.
No problem. Thank you, Mr. Walston.
mhm. Kate, was that the one with the bottom total budget request of 179 million?
Correct.
The one at the end, Kate?
Yeah, the very last one. Thank
Okay.
you. Right before.
Here we go.
There we go. Perfect. Thank you. So I just want to ask this because I think like part of this is like I want to make sure I understand it correctly. When we talk about the salaries that are and services that are currently being paid for by ESSER dollars that would be new to the general fund, in my head, I'm still looking at, when we talk about a turn the lights on budget and maintaining the services that are currently being provided by the ESSER funding. I'm thinking that the 10.8 million, almost 10.9 million there, is really part of that carry forward number because those are services we're currently providing to students. I don't know if that's an accurate characterization, but I just want to make sure I'm understanding that. I understand why it's below because it's new to the general fund as opposed to being grant money. But because we're providing those services already, I'm thinking it may fit better.
And
being
Yeah,
categorized differently.
you know, we had that exact same conversation ourselves late today as we were putting it together and looked at this chart and said, you know, that really is current programs and services. So, and I was asked, why didn't I show it that way? Why did I show it as a kind of a different driver? And I'm not sure I had a good answer for that. So it's an excellent observation, I think.
Okay, thank you, John. I just wanted to make sure I understood that correctly. I
$10 million.
appreciate that.
I'm sorry, Kate. I apologize.
I'm done. Thank you.
$10 million. One small way to chip away at that is, right, the plus 7 million we're getting from the state, 24, 25. So a little bit of help, but, and not, so it doesn't look quite as bad as an additional 10 million, when we have a chip, the state's gonna chip it another 7. But I understand our needs, I do. Thank you, Mr. Walston.
No, thank you, Mr. Russo. Thank you. And Kate, just circling back to the reserves question, I think we have up to $5 million, John, and it might be a little less, might be a little more, that's available for us to request by still maintaining enough in the reserves for insurance purposes. But I'm not positive what that max number is.
You know, that's correct. And in fact, one of the calculations we did for the ad hoc committee and the director of finance showed how much would still be undesignated after the drawdown. And it was more than $1 million, as I recall. So could be closer to 2.
If we were to get the 3-point
Right.
reserve,
Yeah.
right, it would still be another 1.2 million or something closer to 2
Yes.
million, right?
Well, John, I'm not an accountant, but
Yeah.
yeah, not by any means.
You do
As you
pretty
get-
good for one that's not.
But our bond rating, not that it has any impact on what we need, okay? But our bond rating is better. I mean, there's another major city south of us, the end of Route 34, that has a B- credit rating, and we are what, AA? And part of that criteria is that you leave some money in your reserve funds. Again, it has nothing to do with what our needs, and I understand that, but you know, just that was crossing my mind as I'm saying, well, that's why we need to leave a few dollars in that account.
Hey, you're
Right.
exactly right. They do emphasize that. That's correct.
Right, but Mr. Russo, also, the surplus is more than we have had previous years. And that only is there, at least from the district's side, from leftover surplus monies from the pandemic. So we would still maintain the recommended number that we've had for years, which I would anticipate would not impact the rating. Because I think the city has enjoyed a very positive rating prior to this surplus. And I'm not sure why it would be impacted if we were go back to the surplus numbers that we've historically maintained, at least from the district side anyway. So our ask would be to pull the monies, the surplus, while still maintaining the recommended and required number from the city, which again, I don't believe that impacts our rating.
All right. Thank you, sir.
No, you're welcome.
Thank you for allowing me to vent.
No, I understand.
Any other questions? Please continue, sir. You all done,
Yeah.
John?
Yes, sir. That is it from
Yes.
my side, outside of any questions that the committee might have.
Okay, Jesse, anything? Any comments?
I'm assuming that is the worst case scenario that you presented. This is a big blow to absorb.
Jesse, that's a good question. And I think the only thing, at least from my side, is getting some clarity on what the cost would be to feed kids at the high school. And that's this whole idea of tents, heating systems outside during inclement weather. When I had initially did this work with Durant and some other tenting companies, you know, we were talking 6 figures to make this work between providing supervision inside the tents, heating, making sure it was up to standard in terms of code. It was a costly endeavor. And so those are the only things we don't have costed out yet. So we could be talking another $50,000 to $100,000. But outside of that, in terms of staff, I believe we have captured the biggest brunt of the request for 24-25.
And that would just be for that one school year until the academy
Gosh, I
opens
hope so.
full
I
time.
hope so. Yes, that is the expectation. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
No, thank you.
Teresa,
I'm
Right.
good.
thank you. Louisa, any questions?
No, I'm good, Al. Thank you.
Julie Milano,
No, sir, I'm good. Thank you very much.
right? Do you have any closing remarks, Mr. Walson?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Russo. So, number one, thank you everyone for joining us this evening. I am and will continue to be. I know we have a long road ahead of us, but I will continue to and remain to be optimistic. I know again that there's a lot of work to be done. John and I in my office will be working hard to make sure we get out in the month of December when we don't have any board meetings, but make sure we're very active as we had articulated on the budget calendar, and really just making the community aware of where we are, just in terms of financially and what the request will be, in the rationale and the why. And so, we'll make sure we'll be working on those things over the next couple of weeks leading into the holiday break, and then making sure we're positioned well for the board to reiterate what we've talked about tonight and at our meeting on the 20th, and then again in January leading into our budget proposal and submission to the mayor's office and council.
Well, thank you, sir.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
just a reminder to follow up about that article in the paper, clarification.
Very
have
good
that.
point, Teresa. Thank you.
Thank you.
I will entertain a moment for adjournment. Thank you, Teresa. I'm looking for a second. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Jesse. Thank you, Louisa. Thank you, Julie, for taking the time. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Have a good evening all.